Good afternoon. My name is Andy Chan, and I'm the Vice President for Innovation and Career Development at Wake Forest University. And we're here today to talk about the technology of college-to-career networks. You've heard a lot over this day so far about how universities don't seem to be doing nearly enough to help students as they navigate the path from college to career. And today we have a panel of both people inside higher ed as well as outside of higher ed, or partners to higher ed, who are trying to figure out how to solve that problem. So today, as you can see, we've got all the different panelists, and inside your folder you'll have all the bios on everyone. So we're not going to go into backgrounds in every single person. Over here, this is Leah Lommel, who's at Arizona State University, and the reason why I'm here is that we had one less two chairs, and we didn't have a panel, so she's not Andy. I just want to make sure you know that who she is. All right. So for the panel to get started, one of the first questions that I think everyone continues to just really ask about is there seems to be a big paradigm shift when it comes to college career networks. And can you talk a little bit about why you think that's happening? And you don't have to give a full, long answer about the full treaties, but at least from your perspective, maybe a couple things that you think are some of the key factors that are making this such a big deal right now. Leah.
Sure, I'll get started. So I think part of it is, and I just want to say, it's not that higher education and universities aren't wanting to keep up. I think that the career industry and the job market has been changing at such a rapid pace, it sort of took them a while to realize. I think I just recently heard that the jobs that exist today may not exist in 5 years. So we have to be able to create an environment that is adaptive enough to keep up with the career industry so that the colleges can make sure the students are well prepared.
Great. I think there are three forces coming together that make this such an urgent topic of conversation. One is the rising cost of college. And so students feel they're putting forward a larger investment and they want to see that return. The second is the recession that we're coming out of, and it was more difficult for recent graduates to find the career opportunities that they were looking for. And then the third, as Leah mentioned, is the rapidly changing job market landscape. I think all three of those things come together to create a lot of urgency around this topic.
I'm going to add to those three things, which are all correct. That the generational changes of our student populations play a big role in those. And you're hearing a lot about millennials and now Generation Z is coming after them. And the changes for their parents. The parents' generation is also changing. And we can go into a whole other conversation about helicopter parents and what their concerns are and how they're wanting to influence the outcomes of their students' paths. The one thing that I want to make sure that I also share is that this is not a new thing necessarily. We got Andy a chair, perfect. Hey. This is not necessarily a new thing. Actually, if you track the evolution of college to career transitions in higher education in general, this tends to happen every time the economy changes. About 20 to 30 years, you will see that there are different models in higher education that change. The last really big one that we went through was post-World War II with GI Bill and the return of veterans, and all of a sudden colleges really were under pressure to use the word place the students into jobs in a manufacturing economy. So you could see that just really creating sort of what was known for many decades as a placement model. The reality is that today, the purpose of higher education of colleges is no longer and should no longer be connected to this word placement. Higher education is not there to place people in jobs or to place them in careers. It's there to educate students, to prepare them, to connect them to different networks, to help them aspire to bigger things. And we are trying now, we're really wrestling with this idea of how do we do that? How do we move forward? We're no longer there to place, or we're not there to place, so what is our purpose? And there are all these demands around us. I would add also that government has entered into this discussion to try to respond to these issues.
I think I would just call out two things, echoing the affordability. I think that I see now a much greater degree of what I'd call an economic rational mindset among parents and students, looking at what exactly am I getting for this education I'm going to be stepping into, which again is just a further reiteration of affordability. The other one I would add is I think the implications of technology. I think we have a capability now to be more precise in how we potentially can present our graduates to careers. Many jobs have much more precision to what we're looking for, and so our ability as higher ed, or the pressure we face as higher ed, to more perfectly represent our students to the next step is a variable that I think is also contributing to this issue.
Yeah, so last but probably least as well, hello everyone, I'm Daniel Cohen, I'm the CEO of Graduway. Lovely to be here. I got off a flight from Tel Aviv 5 hours ago, so if I sound a bit jadey, come see me in the morning and I'll sound more intelligent then. I think what I would add to the discussion, there's a lot of, I think, demand side variables that you've outlined, right, of why career services are sort of coming to the fore. I think you can also look at it from the supply side. We see lots of institutions who are craving for relevancy. How can they be relevant, particularly for their alumni, but also for their graduating students? So this is a huge opportunity. When I was growing up, the old dictum of professional networking was it's not who you know, and it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I get that right, if I'm not clear. But the new dictum isn't that, because everybody knows everybody. You know, on LinkedIn, I'm connected to 300 million people. So I think colleges have a unique role that they can play now in facilitating networking. So the new networking dictum is going to be not just about who you know or what you know, but how willing others are to help you. And the alumni network and the student network and the college network can start to be in the force. So yes, we have, I think, structural demand reasons why people are demanding better career services, but I think we have an opportunity as colleges in the room to provide that.
Great. There's one resource that many of you may have heard about or will be hearing about. Jeff Salingo wrote a book called There is Life After College. And in that book, he really describes a lot about what is happening in the landscape. And so you'll hear a lot of these same issues echoed. I think one of the things that also is an important dimension of what's happening in the world of work today is how much the number of sort of high-end jobs that I think a lot of people feel like they should or want to get are actually fairly limited. And the skills required to get those jobs are very, very significant. And so there is this pressure that if I paid all this money for college, why am I qualified for those jobs? And I think that what we'll talk about a little bit is that there are a lot of ways that that bridge can be sort of created, but it's a big question mark as to whether the universities or colleges should be the ones responsible for doing that. I think that's one thing. And I think the other thing that's hard is that today, there used to be a day where you could actually go into the workforce and take something that was a blue-collar job and believe that with hard work and effort and the growth of the U.S. economy and how successful the United States was and our innovation, you would get to that white-collar space and you'd be able to actually have a nice American life. Fill the dream of having everyone think they're a little bit above average, although that's not true. That's what everyone thought they were. Today, actually, that gap between getting from that blue-collar job to the white-collar job is very large. It's almost impossible. And so for many students coming out of college, there's a huge fear. If I take that blue-collar job, I may never go anywhere after that. So there's a lot of paralysis and uncertainty, and I think that's another thing that's happening is that the whole global marketplace around employment is changing completely. And I think everyone's sort of pointing fingers at each other thinking someone else actually needs to fix it. But I think all of us probably think we need to figure out how to fix it together in some ways. So the next question maybe related to this one is when you think about, given your institution, maybe you can describe what you do just briefly, but given your institution and the types of students that you work with and the institution that you have, what kinds of things are you doing to change so that you can try to address this new college to career paradigm in a way that seems to be very effective? What kinds of things are you doing?
Yeah, and I just want to flip that a little bit. It's not just how are companies saying, how are you giving us students that are more prepared and recent graduates, but I think we need to flip it a little bit, and there's a lot of adult learners out there. We serve many of them through our ASU online programs, and it's also the flip of once you're in a career and you're working towards something, in order to advance, oftentimes a degree is required. And so we have to make sure that we're serving people at all stages of their life and all stages in their educational journey and their career journey. And so I think that's one way that it has to be a two-way street. We have to understand what skills that the career and the corporations are looking for, but the corporations and the companies that are hiring people also understand the value of that degree and that piece of paper, because it creates for them people who can think and learn and adapt. They may have become an expert in that one particular area, but how can they help the company think and adapt beyond that? And that's the whole goal of higher education and why we're here to help produce degrees, is for them to be able to build those skills to help them advance beyond any one particular job when they graduate.
Mm-hmm. Great. Do you want to add a little bit more about just what you're doing at ASU?
Oh, well, I get kind of excited. So at ASU, we've been doing things very traditionally with career services, and with the advancement of our 20,000 online students, we started to realize that we can't offer career services in the same traditional ways. We collaborate very well as an institution, so we are working on pulling together all the different platforms and systems and integrations to create a better experience for the students, to sort of bring career services earlier in their educational cycle, so as soon as they become students. Not as soon, because the number one thing is we need to retain them, but very soon we want them to start learning about how you build a resume, how you build those connections and those networks, giving them interview skill opportunities beyond just going into a career services, and creating more video links, and again, bringing those tools to the student in a personalized way based off of where they are. Again, adult learner versus someone who came in straight out of high school. You have to be able to serve them along that entire timeline.
Got it. So it sounds like you're doing something where you have not just the standard 18 to 20-year-old, but you have adult learners, and then you're also doing it in person as well as online, and so it sounds like technology is a big part of that.
Technology has to be a part of it, because there's also the data that's happening out in the companies that we can bring forward and help students understand what their career option, what their major option is going to do for them when they graduate. So it's about the data, it's about the skills, how we help teach them. We have to use that to give more people the opportunity to garner that information.
That's great. Preston, can you share a little bit about how your organization addresses the college to career challenge that schools have?
Yes, I run an organization called Raise.me, and we partner with colleges and universities to create access and affordability programs for high school students. And so where we engage with colleges and universities is a little bit earlier, and many of our partners are thinking about how can they get students thinking about what are the right pathways before they make that decision about where to go to college or what to study. And they see that it's more important than ever that students graduate on time, especially given the rising costs. And so our partners are thinking about how can we get students exploring majors earlier on? How can we get them, it's never been easier in many ways, exploring different courses through Coursera or through dual enrollment classes at colleges and universities. So they get exposure to programs and fields that they might be interested in, so that when they show up on campus, they're going to have more direction, and they'll be more likely to graduate on time.
Great. Farouk, how about at Stanford? What are you doing there?
So I was hired as the Dean of Career Education at Stanford to really look at this issue, actually. And our approach was really counterintuitive. I mean, I think that what would have made more sense to do is to really run for the goals that everybody wanted us to achieve, and try to get more companies and more jobs and more opportunities for students. But actually, we really wanted to take a step back from that, because I really wanted to hang on to that idea that the purpose of college is not, I don't want to reduce the purpose of college to a first job out of school. I understand that that's important, and when you look at the hierarchy of needs, that you got to provide for food and shelter before you start looking at more altruistic goals. But the idea for us is really to try to think about what is the ultimate outcome for the college student and how we can really contribute to it. And what we came to was this concept of meaningful work, that our purpose really needs to be about preparing students to successfully transition over the course of their lifetime into this ideal idea of meaningful work, whatever that means to them. And what we have found is that meaningful work, really, in order for that to happen, students need to have great knowledge of who they are, of the world of work, of the world that's around them, to have great and meaningful experiences on and off campus, and to begin developing their networks. And the idea of networks is really important. How do we help them develop meaningful connections that they can really rely on for mentoring purposes, to learn from them, to open doors for them, all really driven by this idea of happenstance, you know, the happenstance theory that probably most of us in the room here have stumbled into our careers or have found ourselves in opportunities that we would have never thought of when we were college students. But the idea is that really luck is no accident, as John Crumble says it, the author of the book, who is also a retired faculty at Stanford, that luck is no accident, that we can actually put students in situations where they're more likely to be in front of the right person at the right time, in the right place, and that person would open the right door for them. And if we can engage them more often, then that would be meaningful. So we have invested a great deal into this concept of increasing chance events for students, increasing the opportunities to connect, developing communities of practice and communities of support. And we've really transitioned our entire model from being a transactional service delivery model. To quote a famous person who said career services must die, that's Andy Chen actually, who said that at the TEDx talk. And when he put it out, I mean, that was just really one of the first calls that actually woke an entire industry within the higher education, where a lot of people actually, I remember, were offended by that. Career services must die. It's not like my job is going to die or I have to die. It's the concept or the idea that we are here to provide a service, to place the students, to give the students to an employer, is not a reasonable expectation, and is not how colleges or higher education or the world of work should work in the 21st century. The idea today is really for us to establish all of these networks and connections, and to transition us from being career services providers to career educators. And that's one of the big things that we have done at Stanford, is that we've shifted even the language. We're called career education. And the expectation is for me to educate my student on how to leverage all of these opportunities and all these networks, and educate them on how to get to know themselves and the world around them, not to provide a placement service to them, because that is a false expectation in an economy that does not work that way. How many of us have gotten our opportunities through our personal and professional networks? That's how really the world works, and we need to teach them how to do that. So we've spent a lot of time with that, and I think so far it's producing some really good results for us. So we'll continue to transform with that approach.
Gordon, how about you? Boise State.
I think prior to Boise State, when I was hired to launch the Harvard Innovation Lab, I was very excited at that move that Harvard made to further reinforce and celebrate experiential learning and learning by doing. At the same time, what got me very excited a year ago to go to Boise State was a belief I developed over that time at Harvard that this kind of activity happening on the margin of a student's education was concerning to me. Extracurricular activities at Harvard, at many of the universities maybe represented here, you're going to, or not, you're going to have students who are their baseline level of intrinsic motivation is very high. And at Boise State, the opportunity to come and actually take over an academic college, the ability to grant diplomas and to be empowered that way got me very excited. And so one of the things that I would throw out is I've made a point to integrate for credit learning into that education arena. We offer bridge to career classes that are for credit, a veneer of a la carte professional skill development courses that any student can attach. I would argue it's a great way to save the liberal arts rather than drive people towards an education or engineering for those that have that interest. We're driving, in our case, I don't think it's revolutionary, but driving co-op education and ultimately creating new majors where we're combining disciplines. Just launched a combined art, psychology, and computer science to launch a new gaming and virtual reality major that I think has terrific employer interest that your traditional academic units in a university would not be inclined to bring those three academic disciplines together very easily. So the ability to have the empowerment around this integrated into a curriculum, I think is quite special. In some cases, it may be a new major for students. In other cases, I'm able to sponsor more elective credit. But it's all towards driving students towards a pathway to connect their interests with their professional next step.
Great.
I'll add mine at the end here. Graduway, my company, builds alumni and mentoring platforms, and we work with about 200 institutions, but we have the privilege of talking to hundreds each week, and we see things and hear things, not because we're particularly bright, just because someone says something to you often enough, and you put the phone down and the next person says the same thing, and the next person says the same thing. You see trends, and I see two big trends coming through. I think the first is the intersection between career services and alumni relations. So that used to be very, very siloed, and we see them definitely coming together, much more collaboration. We see even new departments being formed, alumni career services. So a very specific focus on how the two should help one another. Career services, they need the alumni. If you want a scalable mentoring solution, right, and you need thousands of mentors, who are going to be your thousands of mentors? Your alumni. So from a career services perspective, they want to leverage that huge human resource that's out there. And from the alumni relations perspective, they understand that they need to be offering much, much more to their alumni in terms of engagement. So I think the first trend we see, as I said, is that intersection of career services and alumni relations coming together. The second thing that we see is something much more specific within career services, and that's about mentoring. Last year, Purdue University and Gallup brought out, I think, an incredible study, and it's worth you trying to get hold of that, which looked at outcomes and looked at really what are we trying to do in education? What is success for us? And they had a number of different definitions of lifetime outcomes, not just career specific, but broader than that. And the number one thing that they found that was the contributing variable to that success of lifetime outcomes was about having a mentor during your time at school, at college. So it's worth looking at that, but we hear that all the time, the idea that mentoring could be a savior from both perspectives, from career services, but also from alumni relations and how those two can work together.
So Daniel, I'm gonna just sort of ask you, we talk a lot about mentoring, and then there's all these tools. I mean, no offense if someone here has managed a mentoring system, but I think it's sort of half-baked to think that we can just assign students to mentors and they're going to get what they need. Instead, it's sort of educating people of how to learn from other people as well as what does a mentor do? What does that mean? You should be getting mentored through your whole life, right? Like I actually have a number of people in this room who I've learned a lot from in my career. So I'm just a little curious about how that's actually going to work, right? And like I said, we've had a few failures at ASU just trying to blindly go down these mentoring platforms that it's going to solve all of our problems, and that's just not the case. So tell me how you see it actually working.
You should have been using Graduway. All right. But we'll talk about that. Again, I think I give you a specific example. UCLA, we've just come out of a mentoring platform for them. They brought in 2,000 students, 2,000 alumni together. Within a 2-week period, 42% of them formed an alumni relationship within the platform.
And how many of them ever use that relationship again? Do you know?
Well, they go on and off. So it's an annual thing for those alumni. I think the other thing they've done is actually to address your point, define what mentoring is.
Right.
So they've been very, very specific in coming up with making it much more granular on the mentoring. So for some, mentoring might be literally, I'd like to review your resume. Would you be willing to review my resume? Others might be, can you give me an introduction? Or can you answer a question about a particular industry? All the way to heavy duty, once a month meeting and say, I think the way to unlock that resource is to make it granular, however you do that, and to make it very specific so that alumni can give whatever they want to give. And from the student side, that they're very clear about what that person is actually willing to give. So I mean, making mentoring in a much more granular way will unlock that.
Out of curiosity in the room, how many of you actually work at universities? Can you raise your hand? Great. And then how many people are investor types? Raise your hand. Great. And then how many are actually in startups? Raise your hand. Okay, great. Good. The reason why I asked that is, so one of the things that, just resources-wise, a couple of quick things. Do you have a career course in your school where students actually can go to a career course and get credit for learning how to manage their career or learn the skills for managing their career?
In some of our colleges and majors, we do.
Mm-hmm. And so what you see, so the 4 of us up here all actually have courses at our respective schools where students can actually get credit for learning about it. And they're generally not actually skills-based, do the stuff you should do at the career office. It's actually a lot more sophisticated. The types of things they're reading, the types of things they're doing are a lot deeper, I think, than just here's how you get a job. And I think that's one thing that for those of you in the audience who probably would think we can never get that to happen at our school, it can happen. I think you see that in a lot of places. I think a second thing that is important is I imagine for each one of you, your presidents all have a real interest in what you do and are very, very committed and talk about it probably quite a bit.
Too much interest.
Right. And so that's another thing that we see is a fundamental requirement if you really want to solve this problem. Most of the time what presidents do is they aren't aware, or they just think that if you hire the right person to run the Career Center, that'll do the trick. And that's not necessarily enough either. There's a couple of the resources. So in your descriptor, Farouk actually, his paper, the top 10 trends in career services, is something you should link to, and you should find that. And there's on our website, Transforming the College to Career Experience. It's actually a whole roadmap, PDF, a whole paper on what are the fundamentals of what you might want to do if you're in a university to do that. So I just throw that out there as some things to think about. We'll go into the startup side in a second. Question next, I'm wondering, is when you think about just technology-wise, certain things that you're seeing that are really important, whether they be fundamental building blocks to get to where you want to go. You can name the vendors or you cannot, you can decide. But what are those pieces that you're thinking about that you think, this is what I need to be able to get to where we want to go to really make this thing fly? What comes to mind for you?
Well, clearly Burning Glass has been in the space for a while, and some of the data and the open APIs and some of that stuff, we don't have it yet. So I think some of it is about getting the data in the hands of the universities and to the students so they can do something with that.
So talk about Burning Glass just for a second so everyone knows what it is and how it works.
Burning Glass has a series of APIs and information. So for example, much more current information on career, salary data, what skills you might need for that career and everything else. And so to be able to pull that kind of thing and match it against your majors so you're giving students more real-time information. There are more government-driven data sources, but we found those that they just aren't as up to date, and we already mentioned how fast careers are changing, and we have to be able to give students more current and relevant information. But I think what's happening is there's so many point solutions, there is not one comprehensive solution, nor is there one comprehensive view at every institution on what we should be doing. So it's about pulling the pieces that we think we need the most. And I swear Andy did not tell me to say this, but we have been looking at something like Handshake, and other more online tools to help students advance themselves before getting a job. So it's a combination of searching for the right job, garnering the right skills, and getting them the right information at the right time.
Great. What comes to mind for you, Preston, when you think about, again, core building blocks around technology that could help students navigate this process, that could help schools manage this process?
I think students as consumers demand that things are very simple and straightforward and intuitive to use. And I think we should all work to meet those needs and demands because it's possible today. And so when I look at companies in the space that are doing that, some of the ones that come to mind are like Handshake and Way Up and Gifted Hire that are helping to make it really easy for students to discover different types of opportunities. And they have a data-driven matching component that helps them measure fit in some way as well, and then provide on-demand resources to help the students learn the skills, maybe in small bite-sized chunks so that they're better prepared for those interviews or the opportunity.
Great. Farouk, you and I have talked about this a lot. Talk about what you think the schools want and need, and students too.
So you have schools who look at technology and want to implement technology for various reasons. Some do it because it's cool, and we don't want to fall behind. Some pursue technology to try to solve some problems. The real purpose of using technology today, more than ever before, is to scale our efforts. Everything that I talked about earlier, building communities, building connections, getting students to really think about meaningful work, all of that in an era where we're dealing with millennials, with Gen Z coming behind them, who expect personalized service, who expect personalization in anything that they work with. That is really hard to scale. I can never hire enough people to really help all of my students on my campus. So technology really solves that problem at a higher scale, and I think that's why we absolutely need to invest more, to spend more time, to develop more technologies in these spaces of college to career. And to be honest with you, there aren't enough of them. When we started this whole revolution here, at least on our campus, and we started looking at all the platforms, there weren't a lot of options. So for us at Stanford, at Wake Forest, a couple of other schools, we were the very first schools that signed up with Handshake, the company that was just mentioned. When we signed up with it, we were less than 5 schools, a half-baked platform, some seed funding, but a great vision and an environment that did not have a lot of alternatives. And for me, that was enough to jump right in and just say, we're not only going to sign up for this, but we're going to help you try to build this new product that's going to revolutionize the space. Fast forward about a year later, now they just closed $10.5 million in a Series A funding, and it's no longer half-baked, maybe 3/4 baked now, or we're getting there. But the idea is that we're baking this cake with them. We're really working with them, and a bunch of other schools have joined in. There are close to 70 schools now on the platform and counting. The idea here is, how do we use technology like Handshake or any other technology that leverages all of the modern technologies today to provide that personalized attention to students, to use machine learning, to use recommendation engines, to use just a really easy, intuitive platform that is very similar to the platforms that students use, that millennials use on a daily basis, whether it's Netflix or Amazon or their Facebook page or their LinkedIn account or whatever. So all of these things that they are used, they expect that. But then when they log into our higher education college to career platforms, bless you, we don't want them to have an experience that's 10 or 20 years behind. They actually expect to have an experience that's looking into the future. And I think that's the role of technology today, is to really maximize that personalization using modern features today.
Great. Gordon, what do you think?
I would just say that my view is I'm constantly looking and trying to work with partners in the university to get out of the commoditized services that I think probably any part of the university, not just career services, preparing people to interview, resume writing, those kinds of things. I think technology can be your great extender, your scaler. But in my case, when I think of in Idaho, I think where is our career office owning the relationship with our employer base? I think we have a pretty healthy employer base. I don't think that's something I would outsource. And I think it's actually something I would double or triple recommending to that group that oversees that. And I think more broadly, I think this has got to be metric driven. We got to be outcome focused. I had a workforce summit of employers in Idaho. I went to my first one last fall, and we're very 1 degree of separation in Idaho. That's not meant to be a joke. It's just actually a fact. So everybody was at the table, and the head of the Department of Labor, the head of the Career Services Office had said, rather pleased that 2,700 students at Boise State had internships, and this person's a rather sharp-tongued head of this department in the government, and said, how many of those can you attribute to your efforts? And she kind of looked glassy-eyed and realized, maybe I'm a little more of a forensic counter of jobs rather than actually driving those outcomes. And I think that if technology can be an enabler, can position the university to be more distinctive with the partners in the employer community through the relationships they spend by themselves, I think that's the recipe that I'd be recommending in my ecosystem.
Great. Daniel, any thoughts? Just basic technology sort of fundamentals that help solve this problem?
Rather than specific about Graduway or career services or alumni relationship, maybe the sort of broader principles that I would be looking for in technology. If I was choosing things, I'd be looking definitely for something that has social element into it, right? We haven't really talked anything about LinkedIn so far, which I think is massively valuable. And in career services, you should be making that a red line over all of your students' career profiles, but having products that integrate with LinkedIn particularly and Facebook, products that will leverage your college brand. So, what you might want to know about me is that I used to be a brand manager for Head & Shoulders years ago. So I can talk a lot about hair, shampoo and conditioner and things like that. But I think what I would think about in the college context is P&G's big thing was about trust and value. They rank all of their brands on trust and value. And if you think about a college brand, that's a multi-billion-dollar brand. It's got the ultimate trusts from the consumer perspective. So I'd be looking for technology products that truly leveraged your brand, which is massively valuable. That was integrated, particularly with LinkedIn. And again, multi-device as well, mobile, everything, yeah.
So I'm going to go just a little bit of a sideways twist here. So for a lot of startups, they want to work with universities, but they're challenges. Name just like one that you think of that when a startup approaches you, that if they only had this, it would make it a lot easier. So I'll just give you an example. So one of the things that I would say that's an interesting challenge, but also just reality, is that we're very tight about our technical security privacy things, right? Because these are students and these are students' lives, and if the data ever got somewhere that it wasn't supposed to, the whole school's reputation would be shot. So we're like as conservative as you can imagine on that front. So if you're a startup coming and you actually don't have it like in really sophisticated form, where if I pass it to my IT group that they know that there's nothing going to go wrong because of the technology that you're using, you pass a big check mark. But if there's any second where it looks like you haven't figured that out, I will have a very difficult time ever even having you come into the office ever again. Because the IT group will just go, those people don't know what they're doing. And it'll be a while before you could come back around. So that's one example where we're very sensitive. Are there other things that are like that are like really important hurdles that people should be aware of?
We do talk to a lot of startups. I mean, we fundamentally believe that the startups have to push other corporations and they have to push us. That's where new ideas generate. And so we try to be supportive of that atmosphere overall. But I think one of the things is try to learn the industry a little bit more. Try to learn the life cycle of a student and the relevance of the tool at the point in which it would be most helpful for the student, right? Everyone sort of comes forward with this grand solution, the silver bullet, but nothing's going to be that silver bullet, and really understanding the complexity of every individual student and how your tool is going to help them as an individual student, and less about the whole lump sum and what you're going to fix as a lump sum, because most of us understand those intricacies and really can relate to that and could resonate more with something that understands that this won't fix the world in this one tool.
Great. Preston, there's probably something that you know of given your experience that either is a big one.
There are a few things that come to mind. I think security, as you mentioned, is absolutely critical. Accessibility is another important thing, particularly for colleges and universities that serve different populations. And then another one I would add is flexibility, which I think is in line with what Leah was saying. Every college or university operates differently and serves a different population. And we found it's really important to go in with an open mindset and be very customer development focused, listening and understanding what their needs are and trying to be flexible in terms of how we can partner with them to serve them.
Great. Farouk?
Yeah, I think budget is an additional, or funding is an additional challenge that I think startups will run into, is that they're going to try to solve a pain point for an institution, and I think they evaluate what the institution can pay for that based on what they think that institution has in its pot of money, not realizing that actually when you divide it to all of these departments, that the department actually has just a very small budget to give you. So my challenge back to startups, to our partner vendors, as I call them, is to figure out business models that don't necessarily rely that much on generating revenue from the schools, from the universities, because that's not going to be a particularly lucrative endeavor. The challenge with that, and I'll throw it in, and maybe that relates to a later question, is that once the startups do that, they go and try to find business models that generate revenues from other sources, but still serve serve the need of the institution. Is that many of us in higher education don't let them. We have a problem with that. So we in higher education need to be more comfortable with that, with partnering with you vendor, with you startup, so you can solve my pain point, but at the same time, I need to allow you to generate revenues in other ways, whether it's through companies or employers, and I think that there are cracks at that ceiling a little bit. But you're not going to make a lot of money out of my department's budget, unfortunately, so that's why we need to get better at it.
Great.
To me, it's maybe echoing Leah. I think segmenting the market, so it's knowing the market is kind of understanding the issues facing the industry. The other is to really understand your segments. You've got, I'll let you decide your segments, but I think understanding coming in, who you're working with. I think oftentimes the degree to which you're expecting a level of adoption by a university or partnership, and the degree to which your silver bullet requires massive amounts of adoption or embracing or partnership can be a real challenge, given the levels of layers and stakeholders. Those are probably two that come to mind. I had one other and I can't remember, so I'll pass it over to you.
You remember mid-sentence just?
Yeah, sure.
I suppose when I founded Graduway, I thought if we built a platform that engaged alumni better than anyone else, that we'd be successful, right? That would be the golden bullet. And it very soon dawned on me that actually there's another thing you need as a business that applies to all technology companies in the sector, and you've got to make it incredibly easy for the institution. And what I mean by easy is, firstly, you're walking into an existing ecosystem in terms of departments, in terms of products that are already in use. And you're going to come with a new technology or product and say, well, you guys have to adapt to my product. That's not going to happen. So you have to be flexible. So one of the things we did very early on was that we actually partnered with a company called Blackboard, who builds databases. They're a leading provider here, so that our product worked with the existing database, for example. And that would be same with Lucian or Salesforce or whatever products you're using. So I think having that mindset as a technology company that you need to adapt to fit into the ecosystem, number one, and I think let's make it incredibly easy. The people you're working with in institutions are busy people. Your job is to make them look like superstars while they have to do very little work. That's the golden nugget. So great that we maximize alumni engagement, but I think more important for I think all technology companies in the space, how can you make this incredibly easy for the institution?
So I remember what I was going to say, jumping on that. I think it's this idea of what's in it for the university. I had a chance to talk to a CEO of a well-known beer company, and he was asking me, he said, what is it about? He goes, I know that my goal is to make a 30% beer. I know it can be done, but yeast exhausts itself, and that's about all I know about beer making, so I'll stop there for a second. But he said, I know you can make a yeast that can do that. And he said, I went to the #1 guy in yeast at MIT, and I said to him, hey, can you help me on this? I got all the money you want in the world. We'll figure this out. And he says, well, all he wanted to do was talk to me about funding his research on zebra yeast in sub-Saharan Africa. And I kept saying, well, if you just work with me, I'll put you on a Caribbean island. Like, this will be really easy. And I said to the CEO, I said, first mistake was you went to probably the #1 player in the market. You should have gone to, I'm assuming, somewhere like Wichita State, found the #2 guy and said, I'll give you $200,000, 20,000 of which you can do whatever you want with. And it's this idea of where do you also think about the payoff, not just for the university of your service or product, but where do that model offer cash-starved departments, schools, where they realize, wait, there may actually be some element of this for me to use in a discretionary way, some economic benefit that can fund. So it's almost taking the deficit, which is the lack of budget, and creating the promise that not only the service or product you have, but also there may be some payoff for your individual school with discretionary funding. I've talked to 2 different players in a similar space, one of whom has a fee-for-service model, the other of whom is free to students, and maybe could even be a course that I then could offer for credit, which means that's revenue. In our university, that could be revenue back. I'm kind of interested in the second one. If they're both equal, I'm going to be much more interested in the second one, because although my students may get, again, all things being equal, my students will pay. In this model, I may be able to actually also create that as a course or some kind of opportunity I can wrap some local experience around. So again, your model matters.
I wanted to echo that point about segmentation. I think one of the things that happens in this discussion about colleges and universities is that everyone gets lumped into one big bucket, like we're all exactly the same, and everyone's got the same exact problem, but in fact it's really where there are 4,000 individual sort of challenges that we each have, and that's really hard to sort of, for startups especially, to figure out, well, who do I go after? And usually what people sense is they go, well, you go after the most elite, prestigious schools in the world, because those are the schools, if you have them, everyone else will follow. But I think almost all of us on the panel would say, well, we wouldn't necessarily follow just because Stanford did it, which is hard because most people who would think that outside of the higher ed world would say, oh, that doesn't happen as easily as you think it would. So the principles of design thinking really hold, right? You have to really understand who are your extreme users, and you have to really be empathetic and really get to know them. So something that Ben Nelson on the Minerva project said this morning is he purposely started that company as the long startup, right? He purposely said it's going to take many, many years for this to go, so I have to think through what the funding is, what the stages of what I'm doing to get the information I need to get to where I can actually tell you a story. So he's in the middle of telling a story. He hasn't yet figured it all out, but he's got a great story right now because he had in his mind this was going to be many, many years to actually get this going. And I do think that that's a little bit, I'm not, hopefully not too discouraging for many of you who are in startups, but you actually have to have that kind of mindset, which I feel like many of you might feel this way, like being in higher ed. I felt like coming to Wake Forest, I was trying to change a culture. And that's a 10-year proposition of which many startups will go, no way, I can't do this for 10 years. But actually, when you see most of the most successful startups, it's actually like at year 10 where everyone's making all the money. So, you know, if you join a startup, go with year 7. But don't, but not because you're the founder, you just plan it out that it's going to take that long. But it gives you the time to actually work with one school for a really long time, get the case working, and all of a sudden, they'll find everyone else who's like them because it works so well. That's a really important dynamic that I see my friend John Zeitlin out here, and he's over AdviceStream, which is this amazing product that helps students who are looking for medical school. That when I saw that product that was built actually at Duke, it's like the most amazing tool. It is so good for those students. Now he's got to figure out how to extend it beyond that, but for that particular solution, it is bang up awesome. And it's because they focused on a particular segment. That's the point that you were making too. Well, we're about to wrap up. I'm going to go through one last round of questions that would be basically, so when you think about where the future is and where it's all going, how do you see this all coming together? Like, how do you see what are maybe either some of the players out there, or what are the kinds of technologies that you see actually being part of the big future that's going to solve this challenge that we have? Or do you actually look at it and go, you know what, we're just going to be scrambling around here for a long time, and it's just going to be an ongoing, never-ending challenge that we just have to be ready to just know that we're going to always have conferences like this where most people at conference don't like us who work in the university because they think that we're not doing a good enough job. But what do you think it's going to be like? When you look out 5 or 10 years, will it be dramatically different? Well,
the good news is we don't know exactly what it's going to be like in 5 to 10 years, so that keeps us sort of challenged and on top of our game. You know, it's hard to say exactly where we're going to be. I don't think there's going to be one grand solution. I think it's going to be about universities staying adaptable and being willing to work with many different companies and quickly shift to whatever is relevant at the time. And I think it's very important for the universities to keep their focus and to remember that the student and their success is at the center of it, and how they succeed is what matters. And so we can't get distracted by all the technology. There is still a human element in education, and I don't see that particular thing changing. I just hope that we all remember that we're here to try to drive the costs down for the student and make access to education more broad and open to help fulfill that gap that's starting to emerge. So, sorry, no grand answers there.
Great answer, Leah. Thank you.
I don't have any silver bullets either. But I think overall, I'm very encouraged. I think colleges and universities can sometimes get a bad rap for their pace of change or innovation, and that isn't what we've seen at all. We work with 150 universities now, and we find really entrepreneurial leaders who have the design thinking mindset that Andy mentioned, and they're pushing us every day to innovate as a company and usually coming to us with the best product ideas, and we really treasure that. I think a couple trends that will continue to impact universities is the rapid pace of job change in the US, and 50% of the jobs that are out there today didn't exist 25 years ago, and the jobs that students are taking when they graduate today probably won't exist in 10 years. And so while there is a lot of focus right now on how do we get that first job, I think colleges and universities will remain focused on how do we build lifelong skills that will allow students to adapt continually throughout their life and continue to re-up their skills.
Great, thanks. Farouk.
I think higher ed in general and colleges and universities are going to change first before this whole idea of college to career transition will necessarily change or totally transform. I think what we will see in the future is the concept of going to college will change. If you're ever curious about this, look up the Stanford Vision 2025. Which really looks at this idea of what it's like to go to college in year 2025 and beyond, or even 100 years from now. There's this idea of open loop university where you're never done going to college. You go for 2 years, then you get out, you work, etc. You come back, and you're engaged in this life learning process. And there are a number of concepts that are similar to this. And once we open up the idea of the purpose of higher education and why are you supposed to go to college and what are you supposed to learn and who are you supposed to connect with, then the idea of how you transition into careers will follow that.
I feel fairly strongly that this is going to play out around who controls the employers. I think the ability for the moment employers start to look for alternative credentials and any kind of large numbers, I think certainly if it happens in the near term, the next decade, near term for higher ed, next decade, I think the ability for these institutions to flex and adapt were not built well for that kind of adaptation. Enrollment declines of 5 or 10%, even at least in my university, would be catastrophic, at least culturally catastrophic. So I think the ability for universities or alternative credentialers to own that employer relationship is going to be where this plays out. If employers can get on the boat with alternatives, then it's going to be a challenge for higher ed.
Might you be, I don't know if everyone heard the CEO of Czech speak earlier about this bubble. So I imagine in the next 5 years that bubble would have burst or not, right? And the extent of the bursting of that bubble, I think, depends on the seriousness that we focus on careers and career services. It isn't a nice to have. We're going to be very, very specific about the return on investment, how you're truly helping people get the careers and the outcomes that they want. And I think so there's going to be a big focus here. I think there's also going to be a mindset change in people working in career service and alumni relations, which might be uncomfortable at the beginning, but we're going to get there. And that's if career services become a real focus, as a saving grace for the industry here. We need to be able to provide those services on a scalable way. And I think that will transform the roles of people in career services, particularly in higher ed institutions, away from micromanaging, connecting one to the other, to actually facilitating and enabling career networks on a much greater scale. They're going to have to be able to do that on a bigger level. And that can feel, I think, challenging, but I think it's a massive opportunity that the roles become one of enabling a whole career network to take place and being the savior, really, of the whole institution.
Yeah, Daniel, you articulate something that I have used as phrase, how do we activate the network that the university truly is? It is the people who are inside, it's the students, it's the alumni, it's the parents, it's the employers. Like all of us, each of us in an institution have that ability, and with technology it's more there than ever. I think what's really fun about this conversation is I do think we are on the front end of a big change, just like the kind you're talking about, where what has been career services might become a bigger part of student success. It might even go all the way back to enrollment management. It might all the way go out to alumni success. It's actually, we're really taking more ownership for this idea that sort of from beginning to end, we actually want to own that relationship with the student and who becomes an alum and that one person, so that hopefully technology can help us to do that. I think that what you see here, though, are all people who we're very committed, and our institutions are very committed to innovate, and we think a lot of others are obviously right behind. And I think that that's what's fun about it, is we're the beginning of something that could be very, very exciting, something that I think is going to change the way we think about higher education. And we're really appreciative for you to be here. Thank you to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause.